Well, Patriots, let's jump straight into it. I want to preface this segment by reminding everybody that California is trying to repeal Proposition 209. Proposition 209 being the Californian constitutional amendment that allowed for the protection of applicants from discrimination based on their race, gender, age, sexual orientation, or disability. Unfortunately, California is trying to repeal this proposition so that there will be discrimination based on these protected classes. This is coming at a time where Yale University has been found guilty of criminal discrimination in their application process by the Department of Justice and their 2-year investigation into the matter. Yale University coming out this week saying that they are proud of their application process and plan to make no changes going into the future. I hope the Department of Justice brings the hammer down upon Yale University, making an example of them, because I don't believe Yale University to be the only university with these criminal discriminatory processes. This naturally leads me into affirmative action. Affirmative action is the theory that we can create diversity in the workforce and school force by giving preferential treatment to people based upon their race. Now, in theory, this sounds great because these oppressed minorities were not given this opportunity in the past, and now we're trying to compensate for that transgression. Unfortunately, this hurts white people and Asian people through discrimination. Based on data from the AAMC, you are trying to apply to medical school. You have a GPA of 3.5 and an MCAT score of 30, which are relatively low scores. If you are Asian, there is a 50% chance of acceptance into the program. If you are white, there's a 55% chance of acceptance. If you're Hispanic, that acceptance rate goes up to 79.9%, and if you're black, that's 91%. So it's unfair to the white and Asian people, unfortunately. But the idea is to boost our oppressed minorities into equal opportunity. Unfortunately, the data shows otherwise. The data shows that affirmative action is not actually helping oppressed minorities either, with black people and Hispanic people being hurt by affirmative action just as much as white people and Asian people. In affirmative action, a researcher has found something called mismatch. And in the example of schools, mismatch is a discrepancy between the educational capacity of an individual and the educational demand of a university. Meaning, you don't have the qualifications to get into Yale University, but because of your skin color, you are allowed into Yale University, but you can't quite keep up. If you had applied to a less prestigious school, being Duke or Cornell or something of the matter, then you might have succeeded in your classes and gotten into that school quite easily. But unfortunately, you can't quite handle Yale University, and you are now at the bottom of your class. Being at the bottom of your class is an isolating experience because you are insecure and less likely to make friends because your classmates around you are all succeeding, and you feel there is a class differential between you two, between the failing and the succeeding. You are less likely to reach out, and therefore you do not have a support group to fall back upon when you start failing. Because of this lack of support group and insecurity and lack of friends, you have two options now. Your options are to change to an easier major that doesn't have the workplace opportunities that maybe, let's say, a law degree has. Instead, you opt for gender studies or something of the sort, and there's no opportunity for you outside of college. Now, because of this, you are either unemployed or you take a job that is not much more paying than, a $15 an hour job. The other option you have is to just drop out of college altogether and not change your major. But when you drop out, you are unbelievably unlikely to reapply to the school you dropped out of. And you're also unlikely to apply to a less prestigious school that you are more appropriate for. So instead of going to college, you just decide to join that workforce and you work for minimum wage or maybe just a little bit above. You also have a high chance of unemployment because of the insecurity that you've gained through your educational experience. You might say, I'm not even good enough for a minimum wage job. I just have to remain unemployed because that's all I'm good for. This is the unfortunate side of affirmative action that people are ignorant to for one reason or another. It might be naivety or it might be on purpose that they are ignoring these facts. Well, everyone, again, I am Brett O'Call. Thank you for watching Brett at Night. Stay tuned for Carson O'Kimball's segment.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Carson Report. This week, the Democratic National Committee held their 3-day jubilee in praise for their champion, their hero, Sleepy Slow Joe. While these songs and shouts of praise for the 77-year-old presidential nominee filled the radio waves, muffled only by medical masks, Joe Biden, who still thinks he's running for the Senate, unfortunately, was backstage sipping prune juice and watching reruns of America's Funniest Home Videos, an old hip show that reminds Joe of his life on a daily basis. Many speculated that the Democrats could not have chosen a worse or more incompetent candidate. This may seem at face value an obvious assessment. He can barely form sentences after all. But on the contrary, in many ways, Joe Biden represents the Democratic Party perfectly. He's a living monument, an embodiment of what has become of it. Ophiocordyceps unilateralis is a rare fungus known to infect ants. Once an ant is infected, the fungus actually uses the ant as a zombified vehicle. The ant is no longer aware of what's going on because the fungus has overcome its will and eroded its inner constitution. Just like the ant, Sleepy Joe is nothing but a shell of a man being used as a vessel, a host for the fungus of socialism and radical anti-Americanism. The Democratic Party has all been infected by this socialist fungi. Its moderate members now bow to the will of Crazy Bernie and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. If they don't, they'll be called a racist and they'll be ganged up upon until they finally say Uncle Joe. It's no surprise, therefore, that Joe Biden is a Trojan horse for a planned political revolution. Those who listened to Creepy Joe's speech may have been lulled by a pied-piping speechwriter meant to make Joe Biden seem like the healer of the country's partisan divide. He was to appeal to both sides by never outrightly mentioning the socialist far-left agenda, but instead talking about God and the Constitution and light. But just like the Trojan horse that entered Rome and spilled enemies into its streets, Trojan Joe, too, will open up and unleash the infectious bile of socialism and communism. We can only hope that during the upcoming September debates, assuming Joe's staffers actually let him wander on stage, Donald Trump will grab the bat and whack open Joe, the hollow piñata of the Democratic Party, and spill out his socialist intentions in front of all who view it. Joe will likely keep quiet, though, about these radical policies while still dog whistling just enough to keep Bernie's estranged voters interested in voting Democrat this November. But what will be plain to see is that Joe Biden is still a liability. They tried desperately to hide him in a basement for months, but once he's on stage, it will be too hard for his staffers and donors to look as they cringe through every inevitable and major gaffe of a declining senior citizen. Trump, on the other hand, is as sharp as he has ever been, and armed with nearly 4 years of countless victories for American prosperity. Joe's half of a decade of failure in politics will not contrast well with the president's track record, which the Democrats are prepared for, by the way. Instead, Joe Biden will likely focus on the state of civil unrest in the country and blame it all on Trump and Trump's rhetoric. Biden will likely also stand on the graves of Americans who have lost their lives to COVID-19 and blame Trump, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of COVID-19 deaths have occurred in Democratic cities where mass protests and riots have ensued over the death of George Floyd, who died mostly of drug overdose. Biden will likely prop himself up as the bringer of light and the bringer of hope, the answer to quelling the hatred that the left has relentlessly stoked ever since Trump took office. Ironically, the Democratic hate for Trump is more than the love they have for this country. If Trump ever claimed to be an ally of the light, the Democrats would likely insist that light is a dog whistle for white, and therefore Trump is racist, and they would cry out for his impeachment. One thing we can expect is that the debates will be hilarious and worthy of family popcorn sharing. In fact, if it's anything like the Democratic National Convention, and if Joe Biden didn't take himself so seriously, perhaps, we can expect that it will be the 4 greatest SNL skits of all time. Thank you, and this has been the Carson Report. Please stay tuned in for after the break, because the phone lines will finally be open and we'll be ready to take your calls. Don't go anywhere.